Hey, everybody, welcome to OK Everyday, a podcast about TA where Jason and I dive into how we make our lives okay every day. Hey, Jason,
Hey, Ollie.
and today we're talking about
The child ego state.
child ego state, and it's a beautiful continuation of last episode's topic, which we talked about ego energy.
Mm,
Right, so the ego states or the ego energy,
hmm
which is beautiful because today, we're going to be talking about one of the three key ego states, and we'll start with a child. We'll then talk about the parent and the adult. Today, we will talk about the child ego state, which again, I remember when we first met and we went into the ego states, into the
Yeah.
child ego state. I always thought, oh, this is maybe a bad or a good one. So I was trying to determine everything as bad or good. And with time, I think it was after the course we did at Google. You did a Google for us. I thought, oh, it's not good or bad. It's not a good or bad. It's just a type of energy which you can use for particular moments. So when we would say child ego state, it doesn't necessarily mean anything positive or negative. It's just the energy within the context and how you can use that, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's
So
spot on. Yeah. So, it's often a mistake that a lot of people make, is to try to kind of categorize the ego states in either good or bad, or what if I'm always in this ego state? That's not possible. We can't always be in that ego state because, as we were saying, it's energy, and energy is energy. It's not good or bad. It's just energy, and it shifts and it changes throughout the day. And sometimes energy can get stuck in various different ways, or we can just keep on repeating a type of pattern. But it's not to be kind of judged. The ego states, as you mentioned there, Ali, the three main ones that we're going to be looking at over the next number of episodes are initially today with the child, then we'll look at the parent ego state, and then we'll look at the adult. Again, not good, bad, but what's going on in these ego states and what's the type of behavior that we can see from these ego states. And then, of
mm,
course, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to change it? Are you okay with it? Is it working? Where is it at? Right?
exactly. And I think when I remember in the third episode we had when we talked about physis,
Mm.
you said that was your favorite topic. The parent adult child model is my favorite topic
Oh,
in
great.
TA, right? So this is something I enjoy so much, and specifically after understanding that it's not good or bad, it's just energy, and we decide how to use it and contextualize it. That's when it kind of blew up for me. So when we talk about the child ego state, where do we start from, Jason?
Right. Well, again, I think probably if I was to choose any of the ego states that I most like, I'm sure you can tell, Ali, it's the child ego state that I most like, because it has a particular type of energy that suits me very, very well. But I think to help everybody listening and watching to know the difference between um, the ego state as a structure and the ego state as a function. That sounds a bit technical, but what
Okay.
that means is when we think about TA, we're looking at what's going on at any particular time, any particular moment. What's the energy, and how can we explain it using this model, right? So if you think about the body, let's just start with the body. So if you think about seeing somebody walking, right, they have bones that's allowing them to walk. You can't see them,
Mm.
right? But there's bones in the body, right? And you know that to a degree from your own body as well. So when we think about kind of structure, that's what we're thinking of. So when we think about the child ego state as a structure, the stuff going
Right.
on inside a person, right?
Right.
That's related to that particular ego state, right? Now,
Hmm.
again, if you think about the body, if you see me walking, the behavior is I'm walking, right? So you recognize
Mm.
walking without necessarily seeing the bones in action, right? So when we talk about function in transaction analysis, we're talking about what can you see, what can you hear, what's the external stuff that's actually happening that you can observe, and then work backwards from to see what's going on inside. So that's
Right.
when we're talking about the child ego state. There'll be certain things that a person's exhibiting that you can observe that leads you to interpret that inside of them some stuff's going on that's related to their childhood in particular
Mm.
to stuff that they experienced and stuff that they felt and are to a degree is showing up in present day through their behavior.
So something that is quote unquote their bones, right? So something that happen in their bones that is manifesting this behavior.
That's right, right back to when they were very, very young. So imagine as a child, you have very, very small bones that are still kind of developing and growing and knitting up and all that kind of stuff. So that's this is of course a metaphor. So that's
Yes.
what the child ego state holds. It's a lot of stuff from way back, lots of patterns
Mm.
of behavior, lots of feelings, lots of memories, lots of sensations in the body. They're all still kind of stored in our body and in the recesses of our minds to a certain degree, but we can access them in everyday kind of behavior. What that means
Hmm.
is I can at times feel like I did when I was a kid
Hmm.
based on what's happening right now. And I may not be aware of it, but other people might be able to see it. And if I slow down and reflect, then I can become aware of it. You know,
Mm.
why am I behaving like this? Why am I feeling like this? What does it remind me of? Oh gosh, this is stuff from way back, but I'm showing it up right now in work or at home.
And just a question here, is the structure and the function approach, is it true? It's true for the other ego states, I assume, would it not be?
Absolutely. So the basic structural model is the parent adult child. That's the
Mm-hmm.
basic structural model. But the functional side will be that there's different behaviors that you're exhibiting when you're
Mm.
in these different ego states. So when you're in a child ego state, you'll be exhibiting certain behaviors that will look and sound different to when you're in your parent ego state. But the,
Hmm.
the basic structure is those three.
Mm. Wow. You know what came up, and it's great. I love the metaphor of the bones and the behaviors, right? So the bones, something internally we can't see because, again, we could have had a broken bone, a fractured bone, or some a torn ligament as a
Mm-hmm.
child, or even as an early adult. It's for
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
an older child or an early adult, and that would influence the way the body behaves or the way you would behave in the future. That's a really great metaphor in terms of even the psychological effects of how we live and how we behave as human beings.
Spot on. Because, you know, you and I are here, Ollie, because we had a childhood. Hey, and we survived it. Hey, and lots of stuff happened in our childhood. Lots of it really great, some of it not so great. So,
Hmm.
the broken bone or the twisted something is still part of us. It's part of our experience, you know.
Hmm.
So there's things that we still carry that relate to our child ego state, regardless of how old we are.
Right.
Now, of course, over time, things repair, right? And that's part of what we can do psychologically and emotionally and even physically. You know what I mean? That we can
Hmm.
work if we're a bit if my ankle's a bit weak, well, I can start to strengthen it or just keep an eye on it and make sure that I don't do certain things that'll make it weaker.
I think it also it comes back to the awareness piece that we talked about in a few of the episodes that we've done
Mm.
over the past few months, and the awareness of understanding, oh, this I'm behaving like this because that's what happened,
Hmm.
or because it could have been an injury, but it could have been something positive to that extent. So it's
Absolutely.
we're talking about injuries as very metaphorical to the bones or anything, but it could have been something very positive that happened, and that also brings up a good memory right now, or a good feeling, good sensation, good behavior.
Yeah, and if we touch on so absolutely self-awareness is part of why we're teaching transactional analysis in the first place. But also
Mm,
we come back to the I'm okay, you're okay. It's not about judging what happened. It's about being aware that it's now part of our experience.
mm,
So it's not about saying, "Oh, this happened to me, therefore I'm not okay." No, this happened, and it's part of your development, is part of your experience.
mm,
The nice stuff and the not so nice stuff. But with the nice stuff, absolutely, recognize it and kind of really enjoy it. And we'll talk about that in a second. I think when we look at the functional ego state, part
mm,
of the child ego state, but also the not so great stuff that might have happened. It's we can still work with that. So it's not holding us back in any way. So it's we integrate it and we work with it and we grow from it.
mhm, mm. And like going into the function
Hmm.
of the child ego state, this is where it becomes really interesting, I think, because we talk about the two child states.
Right. So in the functional model, the child ego state breaks up into two different sets of behaviors, at least two, right? Some people might
Okay.
argue there's another one as well, but there's at least
Okay.
two observable patterns of behavior that people can see, that you can recognize if you slow down and kind of listen to what you're doing or observe what you're doing. So one of them is called the adapted child, so the adapted child behavior, and the other one is called the free child behavior. So they're the two basic behaviors and behavior patterns, if you will, that we can observe. So would you like me to go on and explain the difference between the two?
Hmm. Let me think about that. Yes, please, Jason.
Okay, okay. So that might have been a slightly adapted child. Uh, well, a mix actually, because you were joking with me, but in the end, then you adapted and says yes, please, and yes, please would be an adapted child response for sure. So the adapted child behavior is something we all learn to do early on, and we do it to fit in, to belong, right?
Hmm.
So from day one, we're adapting in some way to the world, right? And as we grow and develop and our brain develops and we learn lots of stuff, we realize we need to adapt to fit into society. We need to adapt to fit into groups. We need to adapt to fit into our family, right?
Hmm.
Which means we can't just do what we want. Right, we might try that when we're a kid, and then say, and there might be kind of some rules put upon us, say, no, you cannot do that. So then we adapt, right? So we do it to fit in, and there's some lovely parts to that too, as well as some kind of challenging parts. So we're adapting our behavior and our expression to fit in some way with what's going on in our society, in our world, in our culture at that time, right? And of course, you
Hmm.
will see this in different cultures, right? You'll see certain adapted behavior in one culture that's different in another culture. Okay?
Hmm.
Now, the
True.
free child, that's kind of nearly the opposite. The free child doesn't want to adapt at all, right? The free child wants to have fun, wants to be creative, doesn't want to be hampered. Doesn't homework, schmomework. Yeah, I'm busy enjoying myself. So, well, what's this homework gig? So the free child is really it's free for a reason. The energy is free flowing, you know, and the child wants to do whatever the child wants to do. And you can imagine there can be a bit of backlash on that from society and from mom and dad and from teachers or whoever. What do you think of those, Ollie?
You know, well, even when I was listening to you, the energy of the way you described it changed I think in a natural way. When you describe something as adapted or free, it kind of it just changes. I think
Mm,
subconsciously sometimes even. But when you were talking about the adapted child, I think one memory came to mind is well, one thought came to mind rather than a
hmm.
memory is that a lot of the a lot of the things that we did, for example, with my father to connect, I
Okay.
would never have done by myself.
Ah,
Right.
okay,
So,
yeah.
say for some people, it can be going fishing,
Mm,
right? For some people, he loved garages and building. Like
mm, mm,
he would go to a garage and fix something. I would spend some time with him, not for a choice. I would never do that as something that I would be interested in,
mm,
but
mm.
I did spend time with him, and that was a way to connect, right?
Yeah,
So, and that in a way for me, that was kind of the adapted child behavior because I would follow with him, and we would spend time doing something that he would be interested in, and the interest came along with time, So I've learned
yeah,
how to
yeah,
find fun
yeah,
in those actions.
yeah.
At the same time, there's a lot of free child behaviors even now that I'm expressing, and I would agree with you. That's one of my favorite ego states to be in. But one thing that came to mind when you were talking is, um, would it, and tell me what you think about this, because whenever you say free child or adapted child, it kind of sounds deterministic. But the idea that I had was saying free child energy, adapted child energy.
Yes.
That sounds a little bit more expansive in a way of it doesn't determine, oh, you're a free child. No, no, no. It's just you're exhibiting that kind of energy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's a very important point, because it does change. It is energy. It does move on, because one
Mhm.
of the risks with this type of theory is people label. You say, oh, he's that and she's that, and that's not the way to use transaction analysis. It's we can't weaponize it like that. You know what I mean, or kind of
Mm,
judge in that way because instantly we're moving into not okay behavior.
Right.
So it's just about finding out, okay, what just happened there? How did that make me feel? Or what kind of energy do
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring to a particular situation? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Your example there with your dad is a great one because it is adapting to what he wanted to do. Right. So he wanted to kind of, work in mechanics, let's just say broadly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that wouldn't be your first choice, but the payoff was you got to spend time with him. Right. The second payoff is I'm sure you learned loads eventually, about what he was doing. So there's a kind of a double win there in a way. But you were
Mm.
adapting to what he wanted to do, his choice, and that's one of the kind of lovely parts about the adapted child behavior. It's the good kids who adapt. Do you know what I mean? In that they don't get in trouble. The teachers love them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So they have their homework done on time. They turn up on time. This is all applauded by the teachers, by mom and dad, by society. They're the people who don't mind queuing for a long time. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what you got to do in that situation. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to kicking up a fuss. So there is a lot of positivity that comes from the adapted child behavior. Of course, sometimes it's not so good where the adapted child behavior, we might be doing something that we don't really want to do, but we feel like we have to.
Mm.
So this is where we may not be actually congruent with ourselves. It might go against one of our values. As a child, we wouldn't quite understand this, but certainly later on in life, we might say, no, actually, I'm not going to do that because it's going against one of my values. If I'm adapting, then I'm just doing it, right, without questioning it. And long term, that's not a good thing to do, right? Because it'll backfire eventually.
And just to shout out, we have episode 7 on congruency.
Oh, there you
So
go.
if
Good man.
anyone wants to check that out, that week there is a little bit more to that. But it does sound right. And one of the things we talked about I think it's great to dive into this. One of the things we talked to prep to this episode was what kind of movies or what kind of characters could resonate with, say, the free child behavior and the adapted child behavior.
Mm.
So, what did you have in mind in terms of movies
Yeah, well, I'll,
that
I'll
can help?
I'll explain a little bit more about the free child as well, because the free child
All right.
behavior has some lovely stuff and some watch outs as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
both of them both sides have to we need to know them so we don't overdo either of them in a way. So the free child obviously has a lot of creativity, a lot of fun, a lot of laughter. I use free child energy a lot because I really enjoy it. I bring it into my
Even
work.
here.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the reasons I love this podcast is I get to do a little bit more every day. But I really do enjoy it because things can feel heavy and
Mm,
serious, and that's the adapted child can get all caught up there about the heavy and the seriousness, and the responsibility and all that kind of stuff. So I like to make sure I get into free child behaviors on a regular basis. The watch out with the free child is doing it too much and inappropriately. You know what I mean? Like where things actually ought to be a little bit serious, making a big joke out of it, or not take it
mm,
seriously enough, or not caring about turning up on time, and not caring about having the work done to any particular standard. They're the kind of watch outs for that's the kind of the negative side of the free child, right?
yeah.
And of course overdoing it, maybe booze and drugs and stuff like that is that's the other end of the where it gets really really slippery, right? Getting into addiction. But
Wow.
when I was thinking of who comes to mind if I was to think free child energy? And two people kind of sprung up. One, quite obviously for me, is Robin Williams, the comedian.
Love that guy.
That man had a huge amount of free child energy, just kind of oozed out of him at any particular time. Even when he was supposed to be taking it serious, all of a sudden it'd come out. And a kind of another example more recently, if those people don't who may not be too familiar with Robin, who only recently passed away, is Jack Black would be another one. So Jack Black is an actor. He picks a lot of a lot of kind of movie roles where he can actually have a lot of fun with and play his music. And I don't
True.
know if what's the School of Rock if you see him on the
School of Rock is
ground.
an amazing one.
A lot of free child behavior that he puts out there. Did you have any yourself from the free child? Does anybody come to mind for you?
So the one that came to mind straight away, and it comes to it's one of my first and favorite actors that did it. Apparently, he stopped doing it. He stopped acting for since recently, but it's Jim Carrey, and his
Ah,
free
yes.
child would be Ace Ventura. I think that was a great example of free child. He's got a he's got actually a kind of a mohawkish hairstyle,
Yeah.
and he works with a ton of animals, always being very exuberant. But I think sometimes when you mentioned overdoing it,
Mm,
sometimes he would overdo
yeah.
it. So he's not really that social, and he can't fit in well because of the way he is. Which is again, it's a movie. There is there is an extent to it, but I think that's the first thing that came to mind in terms of Free Child.
Yeah, actually, both. I'd say it's very interesting. We've both gone to very similar type characters, Robin Williams and Jim Carrey,
Jim
because I
Carrey.
think they struggle to stop that free child sometimes. They just couldn't help themselves. Do you know what I mean? So, like they were always on in a way, and I think that eventually that would be exhausting. So,
Mm,
that's again these are two great examples. And then when I was thinking about the adapted child, I thought, well, who's somebody that has a lot of this that kind of everybody might know, because we all have adapted child behavior, but who's somebody that's got a lot? And probably the closest person that came into my head was Forrest Gump, the
beautiful.
character. I think he he lived a lot in his child ego state for sure, but also in his adapted child ego state. And when I was reflecting, I thought, what's a good example of him, showing adapted child behavior? And I looked up the quote. I don't know if you remember when he was in the military. And one of the questions the drill sergeant asked him is, what's your sole purpose in this army, Gump? And he said, to do whatever you tell me, drill sergeant. That's that's it right there. I'll do whatever you tell me. That's adapted child behavior. And of course, the guy said, that's the most outstanding answer I have ever heard. You're a genius. Because he was pleasing the drill sergeant. So I think he's got a lot of adapted child behavior. Did you come up with any yourself?
So the movie that came to it's actually the movie I'm going to talk about is again it's Jim Carrey. It's a Jim Carrey movie, but he's got a dual representation. So he's both free child and adapted child, which is the mask. So when
Mm,
he's not in the mask, he's more in the adapted child state. When he's with the mask on, it's the complete opposite, free child. But again, I think in both characters he exhibits the extremes of it,
yeah,
right? So the extremes of being in the free child and in the adaptive child, which is rather interesting because again, when you talk about the negative sides of those things, of that energy, of exhibiting that energy all the time, there's
yeah,
also enough examples of that. So but that's the thing that came to mind for sure when talking about adapted child is specifically the I think it was Stanley Ipkiss, the
yeah,
character
yeah,
name in The
yeah,
Mask, and that was the adapted child. So working in the bank, always saying yes to whatever is being
yeah.
told. He's always wrong whenever whenever someone says he's wrong. He's always behind on the payment on his rent. The car broke down, whatever. Yes, yes, yes. Do whatever you need to do, etc., 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 etc.
It's interesting. Another one just popped into my head, which maybe the mask is slightly built on, is the Nutty Professor.
Yeah, yeah.
Which Eddie Murphy remade, but it was an old one before, and the scientist was so awkward and adapted that he created this potion to tap into his free child. And then, of course, mayhem happens because the free child is unleashed, what I mean, and doesn't want to go back to the old way of being adapted child. So, it's right there, it plays out in culture.
Mm,
It's all there for us. But, if we think about okay every day, we actually live this. Do you know what I mean? Like
mm,
there'll be times when it's important for us to adapt, but there's times when we need to watch out that we're over adapting and there's a risk there. So like I've mentioned this before in the podcast, often, I see people who are very, very stressed. And one of
mm,
the reasons is they're not getting enough fun into their lives, not getting enough laughter or joy because everything feels so serious and heavy
right.
and it's got to be to a certain standard and all this kind of stuff.
Mm,
And they're overdoing that side, they're not kind of paring back a bit and planning some nice stuff, fun stuff, kind of that kind of life energy stuff. So the balance is so important, I think, nowadays more than ever before because we're overstimulated. What do you think of that, Ollie?
for sure, I think the word balance kind of really resonated when you said it. And it's not around being in the free child or the adapted child more. It's around having the balance of both, because even if I think about work, you can exhibit both of those energies,
Yeah.
but have to know when. It's kind of figuring out when you exhibit them. If it's a brainstorm, most likely you'll need a free child behavior because you need to
Mm.
spark thoughts, ideas, and everything. But if it's adhering to a deadline, free child won't help that much.
No, you got to knuckle down. And
Exactly. You got to
again,
focus and stay focused. Sometimes it might, but at the
mm,
same time, I think the adapted child behavior would be more. And we're back.
and we're back. What were you saying? If you just passed the
So
deadline?
so if you're trying to fit in with the deadline, then the adapted child would be the energy that would
Yeah.
help. So yeah, those were the things that came to mind. I think it's a balance between these ego states rather than a victory of one over the other.
Yeah.
And
No.
it's more of a balance.
Y-
That's I guess the kind of the key takeaway from this
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah. And
today.
that's the hope as well with this theory is with self-awareness, we can choose sometimes to bring the energy we want, or notice when
Mm,
the energy we're bringing is not actually where needs to be. Again, like you
yeah.
were saying, Ollie, if it's too much free child, when actually I need to kind of just sit down and do some work and focus on
Mm,
something. So that's the beauty of I think these ego states is if we loop back to what you said at the beginning, they're not good or bad. We're
yeah.
just in that energy at a particular time. We have agency over it in that we
Hmm.
can change the energy, or we can think differently, or we can share in different ways as we track on.
One thing I can say for sure is that we've passed way over usual time as we did in previous episodes, Jason. But I think it's a good thing because the conversation around child ego states is what or child ego states or the other ego states we'll be talking about is definitely something worth diving into and understanding how this manifests in our everyday life. So, dear viewers and listeners, thank you for being with us on this episode of OK Everyday, where Jason and I talked about the child ego state or the child ego energy. And if you like this video, please press that like button or share your thoughts in the comments below. If you're interested in all TA content, amazing. You're in the right place. Click the subscribe button, and that will keep you informed of all new OK Everyday episodes coming out in the future. In any case, we really hope that you stay okay
Every day.
every day.